It's a story about the ups and downs and the do's and don'ts of political and family life in a Midwest town and subsequently in New York and then back in the Midwest in the 20s and 30s. The 20s were the jazz age, where anything went. The 30s was the Great Depression, where nothing went. And I've tried to depict that, so I suppose I'd like readers to get a better sense of the history of the times. I was completely gripped by the television series The West Wing. In fact, I've got all of it at home on DVDs. In one episode, the Chief of Staff and the President are talking to an assistant, and he's being reticent, and the Chief of Staff says to him, "Come on, this is no time to wobble on telling truth to power." And the phrase stuck with me. How did I write truth to power? Well, it kicked off by sitting on a beach in Miami Beach. I went to visit my oldest daughter, who had recently moved to the States. And while she worked during the day, I sat on the beach and I started to think about turning my PhD thesis into a novel. The reason was the thesis was about corruption and dirty dealings, and the characters involved were unusual to say the least, and I thought they might make a good story. So on that particular vacation, I just mapped out a vague plot and some characters. I sat on the veranda of our hotel, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and knocked out something like 60,000 words of this novel. They weren't very good words, but it was a start. And the process was I would go to bed at night, try and work out what I thought might happen next. And the next day, I'd write that all down. And that night, I would then go back to bed and think about what happens after that. It's not very structured, I know. But coming back to this book 5 years later, it's still if I might say so, it is still a good story. In Truth to Power, Doyle is a curate's egg. There's a lot about him that could be good, but if we were in Star Wars, I'd say he's gone to the dark side. I like him because he's multifaceted, he's deep, he's difficult to understand, thus difficult to write about. And despite the many despicable things that he does, he also has an innate sense of the right thing as well. There's a scene in the book where his rival's daughter is kidnapped and he jumps in to help, no questions asked, and nothing sought in exchange. So that's an example of how, a bad guy can be good as well. So that's why I like him. Now, what I admire about David Driscoll is that firstly, he's chosen his profession as a journalist. And I've written him as if he was a journalist of his time. In those days, there was, of course, the yellow journalist, yellow papers, which wrote scandalous things. But Driscoll writes for a decent newspaper. It's fair and balanced reporting. He sees both sides. He researches, he makes sure of his facts. And journalism is a profession that I particularly admire. That's the first thing. Secondly, by and large, he is a good husband, although he does let work get in the way. He's also not such a great father, and I try to temper this, but often work comes first and his children come second. And for me, I suppose it's something of a reflection. I also like him because he is fearless. He gets very badly injured in more than one incident, and yet he fights through it. He's not bitter, he's not resentful, he doesn't go back into his shell. And later on in his life, it's not in this book, he is shattered when he finds out details of his wife's early life, but he sticks to her. So he's loyal. So these are the qualities, I think, that sum up a decent human being. How much of me is in the villain? To the extent that me includes the clients I've had over the years, I can't deny there is a bit, although I have tried to keep out some of the events that I witnessed during that period. I think apart from that, not a great deal. Am I devious? Not purposefully. He's dishonest, and I don't think I am. Well, for a start, he's 6 feet tall, slim, and good-looking. So obviously we're very much alike. He has an absolutely gorgeous wife. Now, there we have similarity. He has 2 children, as do I. He's a fearless journalist. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I was a fearless lawyer. Law, by definition, requires conservatism. So, to that extent, we very much differ. But I would like to have the qualities he has as a journalist and as a loyal, decent husband. I hope I have been. It would have to be the media, not journalism, on American politics. I think he'd go running into the hills crying his eyes out. He would be appalled. And not just because of Trump. Trump is an aberration, and you love him or you hate him. What Driscoll would have hated was the gridlock in Washington. You can't just have Republican bad, Democrat good, or vice versa. And in his day in Washington, there was some relationship between opposite sides of the aisle. However, in the Great Depression, when Roosevelt became tantamount to a dictator, that's something to be debated another time. I don't think he'd have liked that much. As for state and city politics, where he had more expertise, I also think he would have been horrified, because the gridlock in Washington has trickled down to a great many states. There are a few exceptions, well, Minnesota being one of them, and he is located in the Midwest, in truth to power. He wouldn't have liked it at all, and he would have whipped his staff into shape. There's an incident in Truth to Power when he becomes editor of the paper, as well as the owner, and he refuses to publish a story about Doyle, which is gossip. And he says, "This is not our business. We don't publish gossip." What message would I like the reader to take? Well, the first one is, where's the sequel? I want to read another one. That would be the best message for me. Well, if I look at the book itself, you might think truth to power. Does truth overcome power? Does it overcome adversity? I don't think so. Democrats remain in power, and they are still following the unscrupulous methods which were introduced by Doyle and his predecessors. So the ending can be read one way or another.